oyster here at one point. Flip it over, and I should be mindful of picking up rocks. Kind of want to kick it first, make sure there's no critter under there before you lift it up.
Okay.
They definitely have ants and sometimes scorpions. Haven't seen any scorpions down here. They hide out underneath the trash cans or in the garden. But yes, rock collecting, picking, searching 101. Make sure there's no critter hanging underneath it. I've definitely spent quite some time down here, so I have the eye for stuff like that. To me, it's that's a shape that's not the same as anything else. It's a little hard because you have all sorts of shapes here, but
you just got an eye for it.
yeah. So there is potentially part of a shell here or a little worm. Maybe shell. I can't tell how big that is. Wow. So we have a lot of bivalves. Those are clams, bivalves, two sides. We have a lot of gastropods. Those are like snails. Funny way for me to remember that, why it's called that, is I say, well, let me try to think of how it goes. Gastropods, I think of snail farts. Like, how would it? I don't know, something goofy. I like to think of little gimmicks and ways for me to remember stuff because there's so much beyond us and it's hard to remember it all. The universe is complex. We like to put names to everything.
Right.
Is this mostly limestone? Or
Yes.
is this, okay.
Yep. Yeah. So all over Texas there are springs and rivers and essentially fossils almost anywhere. Yeah, those are just a couple. Yeah, and a lot of stuff's been picked over. There's people who've been here for thousands of years. If you can imagine coming up here on horseback or barefoot before the city of Wimberley was here. You betcha people have been here. I have not found too much archaeological evidence. Again, it's probably just mostly picked over. But there are, so the Comanche, Native Americans, the Humano, the Tonkawa, Coqueltecan, forgive me if I'm saying that wrong, but all sorts of people would come here to, you know, be around all these native plants and because of the water. Speaking of water, if you look to your right, you see all that debris up there? So remember I said we're in flash flood alley, so that means the water was that high at one point here. And it was definitely a lot higher. And right next to that, you have this big old sycamore tree. Some people call this the ghost tree, because you notice up top, a lot of the bark has flaked off. It's normal. It does that with its new growth. But if you peek out past that, you notice there's not many plants growing in the dry creek again, because the flood would come through and rip everything up. But these sycamore trees have super strong roots. They are very resilient. Wind resistant too. You don't want to plant those anywhere near 30 feet of a sidewalk because it will move your sidewalk. They're that strong, and they're one of the fastest growing plants. The sycamore has the biggest leaf out of all native trees in North America. They are, I've seen some the size of two of our heads put together.
Like
Huge.
this tree?
Yes. Yeah, that tree. There's not much up there right now, but that's what all these are. So when I first moved here, I'm like, oh, they have maple trees. That's a sycamore leaf. It's not a maple leaf. But this is a small one. Again, I've seen some. They're huge. They're huge. It's one of the fastest growing trees. I'm not sure how old that one is, but I know these ones right here would grow probably about that big within even 15, 20 years. And that's pretty big. So all along here, we're gonna start to see some fossils before we walk too fast. So here's one there. That's one. We've got two clams here. So all along this area again, because this is the older part. I think that's part of an ammonite. Just part of that. It's missing the other thing. I learned recently that sometimes these holes in the rocks are not always from rain. They're from clams that dug through. I guess at one point this was softer, so they went through part of the sediment, but I had no idea. So that's also why you have some clams inside of here, because they bore themselves in, and that's where they rested. Yeah. Pretty fascinating.
Very.
And This place may seem a little sparse. There's not much going on, but this is home to a handful of other species, including vultures. So further up along these cliff edges, the vultures like to nest. One of those bigger trees over there is usually where they're roosting. Vultures don't build their own nests. They steal other birds' nests, or they find shelves and places to hang out. They definitely deserve a lot more credit than they get. They help decompose all of the roadkill and prevent that bacteria and parasites from leaking into the ground. Their bellies are able to digest that. It's pretty crazy. I don't want to know what's all going on in there, but it's pretty cool, and they do a good job. Their heads have no feathers, too, to help them protect themselves from getting bacteria and diseases on them, because if they had, all the stuff that they eat, it would stick on their feathers, and they wouldn't be here. It would be a little too much.
So how do they clean their heads? They just dip it in the water?
Dip in water, their feathers, or they just let it stay dirty. I don't know.
Some funky growing up in the country.
Yeah.
There's some things, but I never thought about that feather justification. It makes sense.
Here's another really good fossil. I think that was part of an oyster. I used to think it looked like a coral, but I've been told otherwise. Yeah, again, this whole area is just covered in it. Once you know what they look like, you start to see them everywhere. So all these smooth spots. 65 to 110 million years ago. They're from the early Cretaceous period. I can't fathom that long ago.
Right, I'm still counting in my head. Like, how long is that?
Uh-huh.
And it takes for it to be to this level where you can see it. Like, how long has it been where this has been seen?
I don't know exactly when this area was essentially like uncovered. So you can see like the shelves here are like missing parts because water had ripped through. Best I can tell you is these have been here since 65 million years ago.
I'm trying to remember.
Was
digging back into like a freshman geology class way more years ago than I'm gonna tell. When did the water recede out of the
Yeah, so I think that the Gulf of Mexico's shoreline has been where it's at for about 60,000 years, something like that. So not too long ago. I mean, it's a long time ago, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that long ago. Over here we have some water left over from the last rain. So again, it really takes about 3 inches of rain around here to get this area flowing. It's a lot of water. This spot gets some tadpoles eventually, so I like to keep an eye on it. I do get concerned when we reach triple digits if they're in there. I hope they're growing fast. You notice a change in vegetation while we're down here compared to back that way because we're getting closer to the source or closer to the water. So all these plants here are going to be around riparian zones or the land bordering a river. So without these plants here and those on that side, this would be completely open. You would have way too much erosion. You would have nothing being held together. You'd have a lot more sediment flowing down this way into the spring. So again, we're really big on native plants, leaving things where they're at. We do take out some invasive species, one being the Johnson grass. I really don't like that grass. Its roots are about this deep as opposed to the native grasses like this deep, no joke. That plant spreads through its rhizomes, so it will spread horizontally, and each seed head has like 1,000 seeds on it. It spreads prolifically. It is good for some riverbanks in the sense that it will just hold the soil in. It's better than nothing, but it will take over an entire prairie area. So we do a lot of work here going out and clipping each seed head individually and sending that out of our park. There are billions of dollars spent on restoring native areas and removing invasive species that have unfortunately been brought over through trade ships in the past because people thought it looked nice or it'd be good to feed cattle. But we're just now opening our eyes and realizing we need to stay connected with what was here. So that's kind of what we're doing at this park, leaving everything as natural as you can, bringing in those old native species that used to be here that aren't here anymore. Really trying to stay connected with what was, because it still is and should be. So yeah, this is where some of the vultures hang out. I put a game cam up there, and I have one of him like turning his head at it. Glad there's none in there today. 2 weeks ago on my tour, one flew out right after I mentioned it.
That's fantastic.
Definitely scared some kids.
Also
Okay, stopping at another plant here. It's kind of pushed in with some other stuff, but you all have heard of leaves of 3, let it be. Well, this is a plant that's got 3 leaves. They're pretty tiny because they're just starting to grow, but 3 leaves and it's fine to touch, and you'll know right away.
You say that with confidence.
Yeah, I do. So this has little thorns on it, and that's how I know that it is a dewberry. So this is a berry. It will grow what will look like blackberries, not necessarily raspberries. I wish they were. You have that out in Colorado, wild berries.
it's a happy hike.
So yeah, this is another sign of spring. This is a native plant, southern dewberry. Great to eat, great for wildlife. If you ever want to forage for a plant, this would not be one you want to pick because it's along the dry creek. It's getting all sorts of runoff. So just be mindful if you ever forage.